Okay, we have a handout going around. My name is Mike Feeney. I'm with the Massachusetts Department of Public Health. I've been their director of Indoor Air Quality Program for the last 10 years, and that means a lot of different things. One of the things that ended up happening is I actually started out working in the field of providing people with information on toxicology of chemicals in what was formerly called the Right to Know program. And in 1996, we had a gentleman who had worked for Indoor Air Quality for the state actually for 45 years. He retired. My boss came up to me after he retired and said, "Mike, how'd you like to do indoor air quality?" Like a fool, I said yes. So here I am in front of you. So what I want to do is to tell you a couple of different things. One is that we do a lot of work in schools. You can see all the red places are places that I have physically been to, either doing indoor air quality assessments or doing speaking engagements just like this. This is not limited to urban settings, suburban settings, or rural settings. It is a problem that is statewide. Next slide, please. And this gives you an idea, since 2002, how many schools we've been to. The bulk of our work is in schools. I would say maybe 50% of the buildings that we actually have gone into. I think that we've been in over 1,000. No. About 200 buildings. I would say we've been in a third of all the schools in the state in one way, shape, or form. Most of our work is in public buildings, not only schools, but state office buildings, police stations, fire stations, public libraries. If any type of public building you can think of, we've been into. We average about 100 buildings a year. So, next slide. What I'd like to do is to tell you about a couple of different programs that we've been involved with over time. And what I'm going to basically tell you is almost, in some ways, a cautionary tale. You ever hear the phrase, be careful what you wish for? Or better yet, know what you're dealing with. Because in some cases, like the first program up here, the Massachusetts High Performance Green Schools Guidelines, I was involved with putting this together. This was put together by the Massachusetts Technology Collaborative, which is a quasi-state agency which is supposed to deal with energy policy. And I remember walking into the room and I saw engineers and energy conservationists and contractors and auditors and people like that. And I found out I was the only health person in the room. And thinking back to the bad old days when you were thinking about energy savings, back in 1973 after that last oil embargo that we had, a lot of bad things were done. And so what I told these folks is that I was there. If they were going to build a green building, my role there was to make sure that it didn't turn green from growing mold. So luckily, hopefully, these are helpful guidelines. If a school decides if a school project decides to build under this program, they get more reimbursement for being more efficient and more green. Next slide. Another thing I was involved with, how many people here have heard of compact fluorescent light bulbs? Raise your hands. Okay. How many people here knew that fluorescent light bulbs have mercury in them? You know how many people don't? So what happened was about a month and a half, 2 months ago, was a study came out from the state of Maine saying that if you were to break one of these type of bulbs on the floor, that was going to release mercury. When I heard that, I became like Inspector Reno from Casablanca. I'm shocked to find that this is mercury in fluorescent light bulbs. So what we ended up doing was to collaborate with our state DEP, a couple of guidelines as to what to do if you break them. Next slide. Other thing we're involved with was the Healthy Schools Checklist. This is a comprehensive guide for everything that you ever wanted to know about indoor air quality and or environmental compliance in schools. It's available on our website. It is free. You can download it. One of the things I'm proudest about it is that unlike a lot of checklists, it actually tells you what references where the information is taken from, so that you're not getting a checklist and you're wondering why are you doing this, why are you doing that. You can actually find out where the information came from. Next slide.
What is the website?
It's the Massachusetts Department of Public Health website. One of the things that has happened is that our IT people have redone our website so no one can find anything. So if you're to go under Department of Public Health and under health topics, look under indoor air quality, I will take you right there. And we have a rather comprehensive website. Another thing that we get involved with, how many people here know that by state law that pesticides as the first use for getting rid of a pest is banned? Raise your hands. Right? It has to be integrated pest management, which basically means chemicals are the last thing that you do. Why not, if you see a hole in the side of your wall here that looks like it's from the cartoon of Tom and Jerry, why not seal it up so the mice can't get in? Or one of the things that Sharon will show you is a couple of different, when we go out on jobs, bring our cameras with us. Every picture that you're going to see is actually from a school or a building that we've been in. And one of the things that I can tell you that drives me nuts is teachers who use food as art. Because don't you think that if you're going to be using food as art, that's an open invite for someone to come in and have a snack? Usually a four-legged or six-legged creature. Next slide, please. So, one of the things that I wanted to talk a little bit about was the last time, and probably the reason why I'm standing in front of you is that back in 1973, we had an oil embargo on this country. There are many different things that were done to try to conserve energy. Lots of things that were done to buildings were basically done to save on energy, but not to do anything with health. And so what ended up happening is that you had different things that were put into buildings as energy savings strategies that actually harm people's health. So that, for instance, one of the things that you have an energy company do to save you energy is that your ventilation system has things that are called coils in them. And one of the ways that you reduce humidity in the air is by having a reheat coil, which is after when the air is conditioned, which will actually raise the temperature, which will then lower the humidity of the air. Well, one of the things that would be done by these energy companies is that they would go in and pull the plug on this thing because the energy consumption of that device was actually 20% of the entire HVAC system. And they would say, aha, we can save you 20%. And then they could figure out why the building was turning into mold from the condensation that was occurring because it was too wet. Then we also had, how many people here have houses that were insulated by blowing in insulation? Remember that material? They basically cut a hole in the sidewall and then put this stuff in and start pumping it in. In some cases, they use this material called urethane foam insulation. And unfortunately, urethane, if you were exposed to the high temperature and wetness, starts to break down that resin and starts to release formaldehyde inside of a plastic bag. So then the people who were hired to install this stuff magically became UV removers. And there was a whole state program that was instituted to remove this stuff from people's houses if they were over certain amounts of formaldehyde. Another type of material is blown in, basically newspaper coated with boric acid, with the idea that boric acid would preserve the paper and prevent pests from getting in. But what happens when you mix an acid with metal? Anybody? Right, so what would happen is that this stuff would get blown in onto like the wall sockets and would start to corrode them, and then you don't want corrosion electricity. So you have these different solutions that were offered, which actually created other problems. Sometimes I say, my life is controlled by people having bright ideas, because they don't follow through on, if you do this one thing, what it will lead to. Next slide, please. So that what we have here is a typical thing that we see, and we still find this 30 years later. This is a fresh air intake to a unit ventilator. Can anybody tell me how the air gets into that unit? That's actually gypsum wallboard. So air can't get in, air recirculates, and then what you got inside the room stays there. So that one of the things that you'll see when we do an evaluation of indoor air quality inside the building, what we're looking at is basically what are people doing in the building, how is air circulating, how is it being removed, how is it diluting what's there. And if you can't dilute it, why use it? Next slide. So that when we look at a building, we look at ventilation, we look at water damage. We don't do mold testing, but we'll look at water damage, because if you think about it, mold is a subsection of water damage. And then we look at point sources of environmental irritants. We have a nice little laundry list very early on, and we'll go into those in some detail. And we look at a couple different things. We look at carbon dioxide. Right now, we are all exhaling carbon dioxide because that's part of respiration. The ventilation industry uses this to see how well air exchanges from the outdoors to the indoors and back. We use the number 800 or above to indicate that the ventilation system needs to be adjusted. Why? It's because the ventilation system is bringing in fresh air into a room to dilute what's here. And the system should also have an exhaust vent, which will physically take the air from here and remove it. So if one of those things isn't working, you're going to have a buildup of things that naturally occur in buildings. And now, buildings and people use chemicals. In any average classroom, I mean, now we've gone from chalkboards to dry erase boards, okay, which used to have, which now have isopropyl alcohol, which is an organic solvent. So that, how many people here had 10 kids, 50 kids using those markers, and then you get that nice odor, right? You have to have a ventilation system with those. Did you have to have a ventilation system with chalkboards? No. You have to have the windows open. We also look at temperature. We also look at humidity. Next slide, please. And one of the things that you can find, and this is a fact in Massachusetts, is that almost any building where you have a clear, cold day, below freezing, no clouds in the sky, the humidity indoors is going to be less than 20%. Because when you take that air, outdoor air, which is around 30%, you heat it, you're dropping the humidity. A couple of schools that we've done over the last couple of years, we've actually, in the middle of the dead of winter, have gotten single-digit humidities. That in and of itself can be irritating to the eyes, nose, and throat. It can cause skin irritations to become worse. It also causes dusts and dirts to become more readily aerosolized because there's no moisture there to have stick surfaces. It causes organic solvents to evaporate more rapidly. The thing is that you can't add more humidity because your buildings aren't designed for it. Adding a humidifier into a space isn't going to change the humidity that much at all. So what we recommend is that people drink water. Drink lots of water. Keep yourself hydrated. That will help reduce the irritant symptoms. And cleaning. Lots of cleaning using HEPA filter vacuum cleaners because that will actually physically take out dust from the air. A regular vacuum cleaner has a filter in it. It's designed to protect the motor. The only thing that will filter out is a golf ball or an acorn. It will not filter out respirable dust. So every report that we have, we recommend getting a HEPA filter vacuum cleaner. Next slide. Then over 70%, you start to get things that building materials can start to get wet enough to start to grow mold. Next slide. Now, all the things that you can have, that you need to grow mold, you have to have the spores, you can't get rid of them. They are everywhere, they're in building materials. You brought them in with you when you walked in, they're on your clothes, they come into the ventilation system. It's impossible to get rid of spores. It has to have the right nutrients. Now, what mold grows on is things that contain carbon. So in this room, the carpeting, the ceiling tiles, the wallpaper, the drywall underneath, the upholstery, all of those things contain carbon. So if you were to remove all the carbon from this room, do you have a room left? So you can't get rid of the carbon. It grows at basically 45 degrees or above, so low room temperature. The only thing that you control for mold is water. And what we practice was what I call Zen mold investigation. See the water, be the water. Where the water is where the mold is going to be. So what you see when we go through buildings is doing a lot of this, walking around and looking to see where the water is, because if there's no water, there's no mold. Oh. So, next slide, please. These are all the things in a building that can grow mold. So, some of these things are the building systems. Some of them are things that are introduced by people who work in the building. How many people here think that plants inside a room is a good thing? Raise your hands. Why? Yes, you nurse in the back. Why?
Oxygen. Creates oxygen.
Well, let me ask you this. If I were to take 2 plants and put you in an airtight room, and we look at it two days later, who do you think is going to be surviving, you or the plants?
Hopefully.
Oxygen, it's negligible, okay? The reason why plants are thought to be good is because there was a study done in the 1980s by NASA saying that plants could eat certain chemicals in the environment. Well, what had happened is that it wasn't the plants that were eating the chemicals, it was actually the microbes in the soil that were eating those chemicals. And if one of the things that they indicated was formaldehyde that it would eat, well, unfortunately, if you don't have any new furniture with plywood or particle board with formaldehyde off-gassing, you don't need to have it. But what plants do introduce in the soil is mold. So I can't tell you how many rooms I go into. There's a nice little flotilla of plants all along the windowsill, right above the unit ventilator, which is blowing air over the plants that are over water, that have that nice little veneer of greenness and that catch basin underneath. You've now turned your unit ventilator into the mold distribution system. So what do we do with the plants? I'm known as death on plants. Do not have them in class. A plant or two is okay, but not an arboretum. Next slide. Then we look at our point sources of pollutants. Number one is carbon monoxide. That's going to be tied to your heating system. Airborne particulates. There's a whole host of different things that can also be sources, and Sharon will show you some of those. And then volatile organic compounds. Next slide. And here's a nice laundry list of all the different irritants that you can find in a building. Now, how many of these are chemically based? Good number of them? What we recommend is that if you find these things, we know the ventilation system will dilute them. We know it will remove them. The thing is that if you can't control them, what we recommend is either you limit the use of these materials or eliminate them entirely if they're not necessary. So I can't tell you how many times I walk into a classroom, if I see a plug-in deodorizer in that classroom, all that's doing, that's not getting rid of the odor, that's giving you something else to smell. And in actuality, what's exposing you to is a heated oil, which is also can be called a fume. How many people here have actually got their noses over a burning candle? What happens to your nose? It's very irritating because you're being exposed to liquid, to aerosolized heated wax. It's the same concept. So we go into these rooms, we take pictures of them, we pull them out. Next slide. We also have, when you look at buildings, there's 3 reasons why they go bad. Poor design, poor capital maintenance, and what we like to call building occupant-induced problems. So if you remember the old comic strip Pogo, we've met the enemy, and the enemy is us. So if we go into, Sharon will show you a couple of these. So that's an example of poor design. You can have this like. You can have either inadequate ventilation, or poor design, or something that's overdone. If you ever are going to build a building, make sure that the architect has not only built buildings only in California, right? Because you know the song, "It doesn't rain in California." If it doesn't rain, do they need roof drains? They never designed them in, and guess where the rain goes in Massachusetts? Into the building. I've done too many of those buildings over the years. Now here we have an example of a bad design. Here we have this nice parking area, right? Guess what that is? That's the fresh air intake for a classroom right above that. Next slide. Capital maintenance means that you actually have to fix the building.
Like up to 5? Okay.
So that in this case, fixing the building is not treating a steam leak by putting a catch basin above the suspended ceiling to catch the water dripping. Next slide. Or in this case, you want to have paint sitting right next to the radiator. Next slide. Sharon, go right ahead.
Our generation